Welcome back to Matcave Gaming, and today we're out of the cave again to continue our talk about the Resident Evil franchise. Last time we talked about parts 1 and 2. Today we're going to talk about the highly anticipated follow-up to Resident Evil 2, Nemesis, the third entry into the Resident Evil franchise. Now, this game had big shoes to fill because Resident Evil 2 became so successful, and still, in my opinion, is probably one of the most successful ones out of the entire series. So how do you follow up a game like that? Well, Resident Evil 3, codenamed Nemesis, took it upon itself to reinvent the franchise at this point while keeping the core elements intact. Now, by that I mean they still kept, puzzles and the same game mechanics. It's still the same tank controls. This time around, though, the little tweaks to that also. You had a quick turn this time. In the old games, you had to manually turn yourself around. It got fairly slow at points, and at some points even got you killed. But now there was a quick turn, so you just quickly do a 180, and you're heading off in the other direction. But the biggest change was the newest element to the game with its featured character, Nemesis. This time around, instead of just worrying about what's lurking behind every door, you are constantly being chased. Nemesis is after you the entire game, and you don't know when or where he's going to come out to try to get you. This element of being chased, of being hunted, added a whole new level of fear to the game. We were familiar with how to play already, unlocking doors, finding keys, solving puzzles, getting the right tools. But now you have this added pressure of, well, if I stick around here for too long, is Nemesis going to come out? Is Nemesis going to get me? We start off the game, and we realize this time we're going to play as one of the reoccurring heroes, this time from Resident Evil 1, Jill Valentine. She was the alternate character to Chris Redfield in the original game. So we pick up here with Jill, we find out what she's been up to. It's been a few months since the mansion incident. And now Raccoon City has been overwhelmed by zombies. There's military forces, police, everyone's getting overwhelmed. And at the same time, the Umbrella Corporation has hired mercenaries to go and try to cover their tracks and clean up the mess. What you find out while you play the game is that the events that are unfolding in Resident Evil 3 are happening somewhat during and then a little bit after the events of Resident Evil 2, which was really cool how they intertwined the two. I've even seen people create kind of a movie out of these games and splice in the scenes together where they fit. So it was pretty cool how they did this, and they were very careful not to step on their own toes and just kind of make a continuity issue. So they did a really good job with that. But now, Nemesis is on your heels at all times. Nemesis is a tyrant-like character, but he's unlike what we've seen before. His face is just absolutely gruesome. In fact, some of the cover art, depending on which version of the game you got, had him right on the cover. It was almost a spoiler right in your face to see exactly what he looked at. His teeth completely exposed because there's no upper or bottom lip. His eyes are just void of color, and he's a mess. He is an absolute mess. And he is obsessed with stars. The group, the special forces from Raccoon City, the special forces from the police department, the STARS team, which Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and so on and so forth were all part of. And he's hunting them down. You get yourself right in the middle of it, right when the game starts, after Jill kind of sets the tone. And you find Brad, the helicopter pilot from the first one. He saved the day at the end. He picked you guys up after beating the tyrant. But you never really got to see him. This time you see him, you save him from a zombie attack, but he's already badly injured, and he's there with a warning that you got to get out of here. This thing wants STARS members. He's coming after us all. And he gives you the warning and runs off. Like, what thing? What are you talking about? You eventually meet back up with him at the police station, the same station from Resident Evil 2, which is awesome. Coming up on that, you come from it from the outside, a different angle, and just all these memories from playing part 2 start coming back. It's like, wow, this is really cool. And then we find Brad, and he's like, oh, Jill, you gotta get out of here. And then Nemesis. Nemesis jumps in, gets a hold of Brad, and, well, we don't get to see Brad anymore after that. His encounter with Nemesis does not go well for him. It just... He wouldn't prefer that ending. And you know what? If you haven't seen it, go look it up. It's pretty gruesome. And, but, yeah, Brad's dead. So you finally get away. Well, if you choose to, I should say. That was another element that came into the game. You got to make choices. There were moments in the game, especially when it came to an encounter with Nemesis. Do you choose to fight, or do you choose to run? So let's say you chose to run. You get right into the police station, and now you're moving on with the game. But the benefit to fighting Nemesis, which is difficult to do, and you're bound to die many, many times in this case, but if you do beat him, he will drop items. Anything from a med kit container to hold multiple med kits, to weapon parts to upgrade your weapons. So that was the motivation to actually stop and fight Nemesis, because of the item drop that he would give you. But this early in the game, you have hardly anything. You know, that first encounter, to be honest, is something I generally saved for another playthrough when I had some things unlocked. So you make your way into the police station, you're back in familiar territory, just like Resident Evil 2. But to keep you moving forward and in the right direction that they want for you in the game, there's certain areas, they're closed off. They were accessible in Part 2, but no longer at this point. So it kind of keeps you moving in the direction that you need to go. The game is rather linear. The other games let you kind of wander quite a bit, but this one has a constant push, which helps with the idea of being hunted, with being chased throughout the game. You want to keep moving forward. You don't want to linger for too long, and you don't want to backtrack a whole lot. So that brought on this faster pace to the game. As you go, you start to meet some new characters. Again, there's files and documents talking about the plot and story elements that are going on around it, even references back to the previous games. But now we're going to incorporate some new characters, one of which, who follows you throughout the game, and even at what point you get to play as him, is Carlos. He's one of the mercenaries hired by Umbrella. And his team's got a whole storyline in itself, with Nikolai leading them, and you don't know who to trust with him. Even with Carlos, you're not sure if you can trust him, but you know what? He's teaming up with you at this point, and like I said, you even get to play with him at a point, utilizing his machine gun and his weaponry. The game takes you through several different puzzles. Some are actually pretty difficult. If you don't find the right information and you come upon this puzzle, you could get through it with a guess. Maybe you get lucky with it, but to be honest, you want to find that information so you can solve the puzzle the right way. And it is very satisfying solving these puzzles. You're getting messages throughout the game. You find hints that there's an escape route, that there's a point where a rescue helicopter is coming. So that's your goal at that point, is you want to meet up with this rescue helicopter, and they reference this clock tower that's a major part of the city. You eventually make your way there. Everything seems great, and you're like, wow, this was fast. Could this possibly be the end of the game? It's not. This is not the end of the game. Nemesis comes out with a rocket launcher and takes out that helicopter. Your chance of escaping there are gone. He takes them out, and now you have to escape again from Nemesis. Now, depending on whether or not you fought him, he's kind of mutating as you go. The more you damage him, the more he changes. And at this point, he's just kind of big, giant guy, and he's got this rocket launcher. But over time, he starts to bust out these tentacles that'll reach out and grab you, drag you around, slam you around on the ground, and it's harder to get away from him at that point. But that constant pressure of moving forward, because if you don't, it might be the end right there. And just like the other games, if you didn't save, if you didn't find a save point and you die, you're going back to whatever that last one was that you did. And you may have to redo quite a bit, which might not be a bad thing. You learn from your mistakes in games, especially a game like this. So if you came across multiple puzzles along your way that you struggle with, maybe now, okay, you know the quick way to do this, and you just breeze right through it. But your goal at the end of the day is still survival. This is still a survival horror game, but a little more action-oriented, because you're constantly pushing forward. That was an idea that made its way into later entries, even Part 6, Resident Evil 6, which didn't go well with fans. I don't know, I have a love and hate relationship with that game. When it originally came out, I hated it because the gameplay experience was so bad. The camera was so close to your character, you couldn't see what you were doing. You would bump into so much, so I just kept... And the game wanted you to run fast, so you know, it had even this one scenario where you're being chased like a Nemesis type character, but you just bump into things. They eventually patched the game and pulled the camera back, and it made it way more enjoyable. So I'm so glad that they did that. And the next time that I played it, it was far easier to play and way more enjoyable. But these were elements that they took from the prior entries. In this case, Part 3, the idea of being hunted. There were some return characters, you know, those hunters that, kind of the green, large gorilla-looking things, they would come after you. You had some new weaponry, some new machine guns, but for the most part, pretty standard. Get a knife, get the handgun, get medkits, get ink ribbons to save. You know, being a fan of the series and having played the previous two, you jump right into this one. There really wasn't much of a learning curve, so you could just go, which really helped with that faster pace of the game. Now, a lot of people consider this one the best one, and I can see why. Me personally, my favorite one, and the one I consider to be best, is Part 2. Resident Evil 2 is, in my opinion, the best one for the entire franchise, but a lot of people cling to this one, cling to Nemesis. That was such a standout entry. And being that the villain, Nemesis, was such a focused character, even being right there on the cover art, so there was no avoiding him, there was no hiding from this fact that this was the focal point in this game. Nemesis was here, and he wanted stars. So how do you survive that now as a STARS member? This thing's going after you. That made the game fun in a very different way. You couldn't really take your time like you did in the other ones, especially Part 1, searching the mansion, checking every nook and cranny. You had a moment to breathe in the other ones, even though while playing them it may not have felt like it, but once you get to 3 and you realize how different that is, you start to appreciate those times that you had a moment to kind of stop and think. But this one had things jumping out at you at any given moment. I mean, there were parts of the city burning, but all of a sudden, zombie dogs would jump out from the fire. They're on fire and attacking you out of nowhere. You're running through the street, so there's all these different opportunities to go down a side street or duck into a building. And also the element of playing as another character, playing as Carlos at a scene where you get to step away from being Jill for a little while due to her being injured, and now you play as Carlos with his own inventory, and his weaponry is much stronger than Jill's at that point, depending on what you found and what you unlocked. And he even has his own encounter with the Nemesis. At that point, you get this mine launcher if you found it, so that works well against Nemesis. But if you don't have that, you have your machine gun, you have your knife, and you do have to get past this. There's no choice. You have to fight Nemesis as Carlos. So if you keep losing, you're really not gonna move forward. But you see, like any boss battle in a game, there tends to be patterns, so you can start to figure that out and make your way through. And Carlos was an enjoyable character to play as. When it comes to voice acting, the game's voice acting certainly was not as bad as Part 1 especially. I feel like the voice acting progressively got better as the sequels went on. So this one was okay, but it's still, there's a lot of cringe-worthy moments, especially with Carlos. So, but you know what, I can't help but laugh at that. It almost makes it more enjoyable. This game ends up making Part 1, 2, and 3 a solid trilogy. They honestly didn't need to go any further. There didn't need to be any more sequels. This game comes to an end. And the game's so old at this point, I'll still say it. Spoiler alert. Big spoiler. As you get to the climax of the game, there is a nuclear missile on its way to Raccoon City. The president had ordered the destruction of the city to contain this virus breakout to stop it from spreading any further. So they're going to wipe Raccoon City off the face of the earth. So by the end, you're not only still dealing with Nemesis, but you're trying to race your way to the safety before this bomb hits. You even get a tracker, so it's tracking the bomb, the missile on its way in. You see its trajectory. You see how close it's getting. That, again, on top of all the other pressure added to you on this entry, now there's an incoming nuclear attack, and you have to get out of there as fast as you can. And then obviously you're going to have a boss battle to deal with, so that's just the stress, the edge of your seat, biting your nails, pulling your hair out. These moments are all there, all in the climax. Eventually you get through, you get to a helicopter, and you make your escape. And as you're going, the missile flies right past you. You see citizens of the city, which at this point are zombies and monsters, and the bomb detonates. And the shockwave even hits the helicopter as you're going. You see, very similar to the scene in Independence Day when the alien ships hit the buildings and you see this big, just this wave of fire and explosions going through and just destroying buildings. That's basically happening as you see everything get destroyed, wiped off the face of the planet. As the shockwave hits zombies, they're just busting apart. Buildings are falling apart everywhere. And within a few moments, Raccoon City is gone. It's absolutely gone. A hole in the ground. The helicopter survived, Jill survived, Carlos survived. And depending on the ending you get, you find out the pilot is Barry Burton from the original. And him and Jill, they have plenty of history together, so that was a nice surprise to see him, getting them to safety. And the game pretty much ends there. That's it. The city's gone. Your whole setting for the game for parts 1, 2, and 3 was Raccoon City. And the underground facilities and everything part of it. But either way, you were always in Raccoon City. And that's gone now. They honestly could have just stopped right there. Solid trilogy, 1, 2, and 3. You start in the city's gone, so there's nowhere else to go. Now with the dialogue at the end, yeah, it certainly leaves it open to do some more entries and take it outside of the city, but they could have stopped right there and that would have been a solid trilogy. Obviously, since then, we've had many more entries, not just the numbered sequels, but even spin-offs from it, side stories. Shortly after 3, we had Resident Evil Survivor, which was actually the first time the franchise went into the first-person perspective. A lot of people think it's Resident Evil 7 that started that, but no, we had that back on PlayStation 1. The game was pretty bad. Voice acting especially was absolutely terrible. And the game, being the first of its kind in that franchise, had its issues, had its limitations. There were some pluses to it, but overall the game really wasn't all that good. It was a game I did own. I lost it somewhere along the way, and I have no plans of reacquiring it. But it exists, and it's certainly worth mentioning that was the first time it actually went into first person. It wasn't Resident Evil 7 that did that for the first time. There was even a sequel to it. There was Resident Evil Survivor 2. That ended up on the PlayStation 2. I only played a little bit of that one, but I had very little interest in going through it completely, being that it was still part of that Survivor series, and it really didn't have much of an impact on the franchise. But that basically wraps up Resident Evil 3, a solid trilogy of games, parts 1, 2, and 3. Comes to a nice ending, and it really didn't have to go any further. But, lucky for all of us Resident Evil fans, it did go further. There were some ups and downs, but when it was up, they were some great successes, and that's what we're going to get into the next time we're out of the cave. We'll start to talk about more of the sequels that came after Resident Evil 3, especially Code Veronica. This was a standout entry in the series that brought us back to playing as Claire Redfield, one of my favorite characters from Resident Evil 2. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed talking about the Resident Evil series as much as I do. And if you have any, comments, please leave them below. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you want more from Matcave Gaming. I'll see you guys next time. We're out of the cave.